Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
We have a joint presentation this time, and we have colleagues from inside the company. Deb Robinson from the Microsoft Library. Yay! Hello.
I haven't even said anything.
So yes, another honest-to-God librarian here at Microsoft. There's I'm going to guess there's probably 75 or so people with library degrees or information science degrees around the company, and there's a lot, obviously, from the iSchool here at Washington, but from all over the place as well. Where was your degree from?
Columbia.
Columbia, that's
Just
right.
like
when there was there was still a school there. Yes, and also Jacqueline Crones, who's going to be from the Bing team, is going to be giving us some information about the website that I understand now has 27% market share as of this morning. So.
Powered by.
Powered by. Very good. All right. So first, I will hand it over to Deb to talk to us about what's going on within the firewall with the Microsoft Corporate Library.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. And it's great to see all the Microsoft Library bags that you are using. So I know Meryl gave you a quick tour of the physical library the other day. So I hope you enjoyed that. It's a beautiful space. You may have noticed that you didn't see a lot of the staff there. That's because the full-time employees are actually not in the physical library. We actually sit in a different building. The people that manage the physical library in Building 92 is actually a vendor company, and they get to sit in the library, but we don't, sadly. So I first started with the Microsoft Library in 1996, I think the same week Lee did. I was here for 5 years, and then I decided to change careers, and then decided to change back, and came back to Microsoft in the library in 2005 at the very end of 2004, the beginning of 2005. So it's been about 10 years off and on with the Microsoft Library, and I love my job. What can I say? So here are some fast facts, and I'm not going to read this. I'm going to tell you other things about the library. It was founded in 1983, 20 software packages and books, but primarily the library was founded for a software collection. The primary audience at that time was the software support engineers, and they needed software, mostly competitive software or software that works with Microsoft software to troubleshoot when a customer was having a problem. So the library was really built to house a software collection. Naturally, it has books, it's a library, but the primary focus was software. And as we all know, as software has developed and digital right management has developed, we don't really have a software collection anymore. It's very small. You really can't circulate software. So it is largely books and online resources. As I mentioned, the full-time employees, there are about 12 of us that manage and run and strategize about library services for Microsoft. And there's a really large contingent staff that manage the day-to-day operations of the physical library. Unlike a lot of special libraries, we still have a physical collection. Scientists, as you probably know, love their books. So we will probably, for a very long time to come, still have a physical book collection. We circulate books globally, so anybody who has access to the corporate network can look at the library catalog, search for books, and check them out, and we will send them to you wherever you are located. If you're remote and you work in Rye, New Hampshire, or if you're in China or in India, we will send you physical books. So we have a site here in Redmond, and we also have a library in Silicon Valley. We have built relationships with a library in Hyderabad, India, and there's also a Microsoft Research Library in China, and we partner with those libraries to help them organize their materials. We do some purchasing for them, and we're just kind of sister libraries. The library supports the entire Microsoft organization, all employees. The largest user group is the sales organization, not surprisingly. They need a lot of competitive intelligence. They need a lot of company information. They need a lot of product information. It's also probably the largest employee group as well, but they are our largest audience. In addition to sort of the corporate library, We recently also took over the legal library. Law and Corporate Affairs, or LCA, has a legal library. They have some books. It's largely electronic. There's a lot of electronic research databases, not surprisingly, for the lawyers. And that used to be managed by another group. And a couple of years ago, we started talking. And we have the contract and the knowledge expertise within the corporate library. So we decided to take on that responsibility as well. So we support everybody from a corporate and business perspective, and we also now support the law group as well. And to that point, the collection consists of business and technical sources. We will purchase materials that are asked of us if they fall within the realm of what would make sense for a Microsoft employee. So business and technical. Foreign language is another really popular source. We used to get requests continually for new additions to different languages and CDs and books. And we finally, a couple of years ago, signed an enterprise license for Rosetta Stone. And it's one of the most popular resources that we have. So we do support foreign language learning as well. One of the more interesting things that we have done lately is started a chat service. So if you go to the library portal, I have a slide for the portal. And the idea is that if you're on the portal and you can't find what you need, you can just chat with a librarian, and somebody that mans the front desk at the library will respond to you via chat. And a lot of the time, people are just asking about how to check out a new book or renew a book, or they lost a book. So it's a lot of administrative stuff around the collection, but they can just do an online chat with a librarian during the business hours. We hope to expand that service, but right now it's Redmond-based 9 to 5 hours. So here are some collection stats. As I mentioned, business and technical are probably the most prevalent resources that we have. We are going to try and build the legal collection a little bit. Right now, we have half as many electronic books as hard copy books, but the purchasing is going such that we're actually buying just as many electronic books as hard copy. Like I said, the scientists and the engineers love their hard copy books, but when you're remote, it's a lot easier to access a book via Safari or download it from Overdrive. So where we can, we're trying to go digital as much as we can. We also have been focusing lately on the use of e-readers. We get a lot of requests, or people will come to us and say, hey, I have a Kindle. How can I use Overdrive with my Kindle? And we made a pitch to buy some of the hardware and circulate them the way that some public libraries do and some academic libraries do, but we got shot down for that. But we do have copies. We have a Nook, and we have a Sony reader, and we have a Kindle, and we were allowed to get those so we could experience what it's like for our users who want to use our resources on those ebooks. So we have a lot of podcasts on here's how you use Overdrive to download a book to your e-reader. So it's kind of fun. Actually, and I got a Nook color for Christmas. Love it. It's the greatest thing. So that's a little bit about our collection. One of the more popular areas, and it really always surprises me when we see what people are checking out. It's not surprisingly, it's a lot about technical languages, software languages, but there's a lot of career development that people are pursuing using the library for how to communicate better with your team, or how to communicate better when you have a remote team. So there's a lot of, it's very interesting to see that people at Microsoft really care a lot about their careers, and they want to learn how to be better in their jobs and be better employees and be better managers. So we see a lot of that, which is, it's really interesting to see that. And it's interesting, I manage a lot of the or electronic online resources, and I do a fair amount of research for people. And I have a little bit of my hands in the book collection. But when we had a big snowstorm the week of Thanksgiving, and the people who run the library couldn't get there, so I was working at the front desk that day, and there were people coming in and out. And the calls that I would get were from people who live in the area and had a book that was due back that day, and they couldn't come to the library to return it. And is there anything I could do for them because they couldn't make it to the library? So it was just, I'm always amazed at how much people so much care about their books, and they take these things really seriously. And one of the more popular features of the library portal is the ability to manage your checked out items. You can see which items you have checked out. You can see which items are overdue. You can see where you're on a wait list. It's fascinating to see how much people still love their books. We also have a service, and this goes back to at least 1996 when I started, the daily news alert service. It's a topical, or actually 13 different topical emails that we send out to people who subscribe. It's a way to get a quick view of the news. So we have one that looks at the news of the day regarding Microsoft, so a little bit of everything about Microsoft, and we have these other topical alerts. So we'll have one on cloud computing. And these are managed by library people. It's not an automated service. We have librarians that cull through the online news every day and pick out the most relevant stories on those topics, create an email, and send them out to employees. And it's one of the most well-regarded services that we have from the library. And when I talk with other librarians, that kind of current awareness program often comes up, and there's so much that's automated now, and why not just set a Google News alert or a Bing News alert or Yahoo? But people love this, and it's because it's hand-selected news. It's it's not just a list of stuff that comes from the web. It's people who are actually looking at the news and pulling out the most relevant stories. So it's an expensive service to run, but we continue to run it because people just love it so much, and it gives us a lot of credibility, and it's kind of a win-win for everybody. The most popular resources, wallstreetjournal.com. We have an enterprise license for the Wall Street Journal. Directions on Microsoft, which is a monthly or every 2-month publication that focuses just on what's going on at Microsoft. It's supposed to be for people outside of Microsoft, but it's one of the most popular resources for Microsoft employees. It gives you a lot of insight into where the company is going with different initiatives, and it's really helpful for everybody in the company. Get Abstract is another one of the most popular resources, 5-page summaries of business books. And this is what the homepage for the library portal looks like. This is a SharePoint site. When we launched the site in 2007, it was on the 07 version. It was a lot of custom work. We work really closely with a SharePoint development team, and a lot of what we had was customized SharePoint code. We recently migrated to 2010, and we now have a fast search. But what you can see here is when you come to the library portal, you get sort of a quick view of everything that you would find if you were to dive deeper into the library portal. So you see the tabs across the top for the homepage, the books, journals and news, market research. So those are the different content areas of the library that we manage. And one question that we get a lot is, what about internally produced content? Either from Microsoft Research and their papers, or the sales organization produces a lot of content for selling and strategies around selling. And we made a decision a few years ago to not manage and not house internally produced content, mostly because we didn't have a good way to manage it well enough so a person had a good experience when they were trying to find it. We didn't apply the metadata. The content was given to us, and it was searchable on our site, and you could see search results. But because we didn't manage the data, you couldn't find what you were looking for necessarily, or it wasn't a really great experience. So we kind of said, you know what? The library licenses third-party content, and that's what we're going to focus on the library portal. And that's what you'll find here. We license a very large number of research databases. We partner with MSR and co-fund IEEE. We have Nature and Science and Nexus Direct and Dow Jones and Hoover's. Vast number. In some ways, it's like a small academic library because we do support the entire company. We have content that supports a great number of job functions. So we have a wide variety of resources. And I think that's all I'm going to say. Make sure if there's anything else. No, we do partner, as I said. So we partner with MSR on purchasing some content. We partner with LCA to manage their collection. We do some funding with other groups for limited license content. And one of the partnerships that we also have is with Bing. And one of the great things that we've been able to do with Bing in the past year is actually go to a couple of conferences like ALA and work the Bing booth and talk to librarians about the Bing experience. So it's been a really nice way to be part of what Microsoft is doing from a product perspective. And it's really great that Bing values what we can do and bring to their audience as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Cronus, and I'm in the Bing Product Management Group. Instead of doing a demo today, I wanted to have a discussion about how consumers think about creating knowledge. So as information scientists, you guys are so far ahead of what I'm going to talk about today. So when I talk about this, don't think of it in the context of she thinks she's telling us something new, but think of it in the context of with the average person, your neighbor, how would they think about how they search for information and how they build knowledge? What's interesting is that the role of the search engine has actually changed in consumers' mind from 2007 to 2010, and I'd like to talk about that. It presents some interesting challenges for us as a new search engine. And then the second topic that I'd like to talk about is how consumers think about social information, which I was talking to a couple of librarian friends, and they said this is a pretty controversial topic. But again, it's from understanding how consumers are thinking about it, or users, or just people who are not experts. So these are some of the things that are influencing the way that search engines are changing today. The things that Bing is specifically focused on, or planning to focus on in the future, are social information, mobile usage, and visual, which includes mapping and spatial information, because those are the areas where we see that there's most unmet need. When we think about knowledge creation, essentially what consumers tell us, and a lot of this is based on some research I did this summer, where we met with 48 people for 4 hours each in their homes in 8 different countries. We call it ethnography, but I'd really call it ethnography light, because a lot of it is a structured interview and then some structured activities rather than just being part of the environment. But essentially what we find is that the way things are changing is that in 2007, which was the last time that we did this work, people would tell us that knowledge lived in Google. And when I say Google, I'm not saying anything good or bad about their product, but as you know, they have the most market share, and so when you talk about search, that's what people are going to talk about. So please don't think I'm disparaging them when I challenge, when I give you the bad news about what consumers are saying. So essentially in 2007, people believed that knowledge lived in Google, right? And they didn't really feel, we expected them to have lots of habits around finding ways to save what they found and synthesize it and store it and make use of it. And there was very little of that going on, because people's belief was, I can just go back and find it again. Well, of course, you've had this experience, and consumers have now had this experience, where they find that it's actually much more difficult to refine information. But the more important change is that consumers feel more responsible for looking at several sources and integrating that into their own personal knowledge, or in the academic world, you'd call it sense-making, right? Most people didn't really feel that they were going through this process when we last talked to them in 2007, and now people absolutely did, and it does change their behaviors and also their expectations. So I have a quote from a user who said that what he's searching for doesn't have a personality until he's given the get-go. He's just bland and boring. Once I'm able to make use of him for what I need, he becomes chipper, cheerful, and brightened up. So this was from a technique called ZMET, where it's a more psychological approach of an interview with an individual user. And so you get these kind of quotes from users that are a little more esoteric, but you get the idea. And the good thing is that using search engines and using the internet is allowing people to feel like they have more control over their lives. The challenge is that it's making them aware that there's a lot of holes in the process. So the big insights for us are that, you know, from a consumer's perspective, I'm the consumer, I'm in control, and my knowledge is personal. Until I've had the experience of bringing information together and using it, it's not really knowledge to me. We have a quote from Tim from the UK who said, and he was awesome, I loved his interview, he said, search engine results are not knowledge, that's just sources. I make knowledge from that data and from the information on those sites, but until I actually use it, it's not really knowledge, right? Another impact that the change is having on users is that they are actually starting to save a lot more information that they did and to do interesting things with it. So I have an example of one of our respondents, and I could show you a video of him, but since we're running late, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I'll just tell you what he said, which is essentially he's holding this book. It's a 300-page book full of clips of outfits from the internet. And what he says is that he's actually in Korea, and he says, I'm really interested in American fashion. And it's actually really hard for me if I'm getting ready for the day to go try to find that on the fly. And so what I do is I essentially go find it when I have some free time, and then I pull it out and put it in my book. Well, that specific artifact is unique to him, but we found similar things for different kinds of people. Another person was going on a trip, and instead of just pulling out, her hotel and her flight and all of that information, she had this 20-page booklet of information that she took with her that included tables she'd created of things that she wanted to buy and where they were and how much they cost online and where the nearest metro stop were and 3 ideas of where she might eat afterwards, right? She had done all of this research to synthesize this information before she left. They believe that as a result of going through this process, it's the knowledge that they're building is really unique to them. And I think that anybody who's participated in any sort of discussion online anywhere will see that this is actually true, that really the concept of authority has left the building. And the best that we can get to with what we used to call authoritative sources is really official sources. And the part of the challenge for the user is that because they believe there's no external authority, they actually have to spend a lot of time figuring out where all the information is and how to bring it together in a meaningful way. So another insight for us was that people are curating sites that they use as a solution for a particular topic. So again, in 2007, people would pretty much just use Google as the center of their internet experience. Now people are saying, well, obviously Google's not the best solution for travel, or it's not the best solution for shopping, or it's not the best solution for my weird hobby, whatever it is. Mine is machine embroidery. And I've actually taken the time to go out and figure out where the best resources are, so I just bypass the search engine and I go to those places. Well, if you think about how the internet works today, that's not actually an easy thing to do. So if there are 4 sites that I always used to use when I'm going to go look for an embroidery pattern, I have to go from site to site to site and go through the same process at each site, looking for the information, and then somehow, deciding across those places what's the best thing for me right now. The challenge for us as a search engine is that we end up in a situation where we're not as central to the person's life anymore, right? Because they're just not there. And even though we may have believed that a search engine was always more like a white or yellow pages than anything else, the consumer used to believe that it was a more fundamental part of their online experience. So one of the users expressed this as, I use Google more than I did 3 years ago, but it's less important to me. So that's a challenge for us. The next big thing is that users are looking both to official sources and to social data in order to make their knowledge. So the interesting thing for us was that subjective information is becoming perceived as being more objective, largely by accumulating a large amount of it, right? So the best example, and this is actually kind of an anomaly right now, but it's an interesting anomaly, is that we found that iPhone users in San Francisco have now learned that they can take the shortcut, which is the following. If I'm walking down the street with you and we're going to go have dinner, I look at what's near me on Yelp. I find I want Italian. There's 300 reviews. It has 4.5 stars. I'm done, right? What we used to hear, and what we would still hear about a special occasion, is that I have to go to the Yelp. I have to look at the most popular, the highest reviews and the lowest reviews. I've got to look for clues in the reviews that say things that will help me figure out whether this matches my preference or not. Do they say garlic mayonnaise, or do they say aioli? This is an actual example from a user. If they say aioli, they're probably more of a foodie, and they probably will have more ability to influence my decision than if they say garlic mayonnaise, right? So what was surprising to me after hearing that for several years was for people to say, actually, I can make that leap now. The social information is hardened up based on the number of opinions and the high score, which is obviously infallible in lots of cases, and in many cases, there's just not that much information available. The other interesting thing was you've probably seen some in the news. There were about a year ago, it started talking about how, Facebook was the largest search engine after AOL or something, right? And this idea that what was going to be next was people searching on their social networks. That actually doesn't happen at all. And I'll talk about why on the next slide. But what people are doing is using social information that's available in lots of different areas, especially forums and then, of course, review sites. The challenge is that there are still times when people's only or best resource is a search engine, but I came away from spending all this time with customers realizing that that's when we're failing them the most, right? So I was talking to Dr. Marty Hurst last week at a conference, and we were talking about this shift in users' behavior because she had seen the Google as the source of knowledge, but she hadn't seen the shift to actually, no, I make the knowledge from all of the resources. And one of the things that she brought up on the panel that she was on that I thought was very interesting was kind of this point. If you think about searchers' tasks, they generally fall into 3 buckets. There's missions, where essentially you know exactly what you want, and you probably know where you're going to get it, and it doesn't take much time, and you want to optimize your experience for efficiency, right? You want to get the weather, get the score, get the stock quote, buy a turkey for Thanksgiving. Then there's excavations, where you actually are going through this process where you're going to spend a lot of time with it, because what you're optimizing for is thoroughness, right? You feel like you have to get the right answer. So healthcare often falls into this bucket, but a lot of shopping scenarios do as well, and travel scenarios do as well, right? And then the third one is exploration, where you're really optimizing for novelty. So things like Pandora, the toolbar one that I'm totally spacing on right now, but essentially where you can say, these are some of my interests, and then you just show me a bunch of things. That's kind of a very different mode than the first two. Excavation is the mission is the mode that I really see most people in tech jumping on right now, especially in mobile, right? They're relatively concrete problems to solve. There's lots of information in your environment actually about what your mission likely is right now, where I am, what time of day it is, what I've searched for before. And so what everyone wants to do is kind of intuit what the user wants and give them that answer. And so there's lots of, I see lots of technology being developed there. What Dr. Hurst said, and what I agree with, is that actually excavation is a much bigger problem and harder problem to solve. And there's less innovation happening in that domain right now. And I'd actually say that probably the most important innovation is happening with you, right? Because much of the domain that you're covering falls into excavation when you're helping people with really pretty complex problems. So what are the main problems? Well, there's problems due to information overload, compounded by spam and shallow content managing to find its way to the top of search engine results. There's a primacy of text content, which, although there are some solutions to this problem, what we hear from users, they don't know about it, right? So they say, what's this green plant in my yard? How am I going to put that into text? Plant, Nebraska, green? How do I get there from a search engine box? Obviously, there's language issues. So I gave you the example of the person who created the book with the 300 pages of outfits. His technique was to go into image search, put in one of his style icons. He likes Penn Badgley and Justin Timberlake, and then look at the images and use that as a way to figure out where the US sites that will be most interesting to him likely are, right? So he'll use the images then to navigate back to a site to find more examples of what he might like. We found this to be pretty common, and especially in Asia, there was a real thirst for having the rest of the world opened up to them. We found that to be less true in the UK because they're a little insular, and more true in the rest of Europe. So that's obviously... This is... Pardon me?
The rest of Europe is insular.
Oh. Well, this is what we heard, right? So the people in the UK were less interested. The people in the UK were less interested in seeing results outside the UK, right? The query formulation continues to be a problem for people. And interestingly, we have all these smart people at Microsoft working on Bing. I met with the president of our division, and he's an extremely smart and bright person, scientist. And I was going through this data with him, and he said, really? When would people not know what their query was? And I think that you probably are very aware of the pain that people have in trying to formulate a query. It's not a simple thing to do. So I wanted to talk about social for a minute. And I'm going to get all my transitions up. I hate transitions. So this is a mind map of how people think about search. It's actually based on a pretty small sample. There were 16 people in the study. And this was based on the ZMAP process, which was the more psychological approach that I talked about. So while I don't totally buy into the whole mind map, I'd really like to get another 40 or 60 people before I felt really good about this. One of the things that was fascinating, and I absolutely believe is true based on ethnography, is that there's no connection between people's social network and finding wisdom from other people's opinions, right? So when I first looked at this, I was kind of surprised because there's all this hype around how people are searching on their social network. But the real purpose of social network, of course, is to be informed about people and to belong. Where are they getting wisdom? Well, they're getting other people's wisdom from specific sites and from Google is their perception, right? But when we dig deeper with them, what they tell us is that primarily they get those from forums, from blogs, and from review sites. And forums are a really interesting space because my model of what I heard users tell me was that the perfect source of social information would overlap people where I trust their expertise, our preferences and needs are aligned, and there's at least several people, right? So I don't really find this on Facebook. On Facebook, there's several people, right? And my primary source of data for whether I have an expertise and a preference match is a personal relationship, which is why people say Facebook's great, because that's where people know the people, and so they have this information, right? But as you know, you don't really know everything that your friends and your Facebook contacts know. The secondary cues for preference and expertise matches are really varied, and they can be very subtle, right? So people will say things like, again, you know, an example of that would be the subtle cue of, is it garlic mayonnaise or aioli? And the secondary cues for expertise, I find, are generally social. So the example of this is people really like forums because they get the concentration of expertise as opposed to like a Yahoo Q&A where you've got this big general population. And they can look at how other people respond to the person with the opinion as a way to gauge their expertise, right? So to the extent that other people agree with me when I say that I think natural medicine is the way to go for indigestion, then I accrue some expertise, I accrue some reputation, right? So the other thing that we found, which is the thing that I referred to before, is that if you get a mass of people agreeing on something, then it essentially becomes as objective as you can get, right? As close to authoritative as you can get. What the Venn diagram represents to me is that there is no good solution right now, because while there's a lot of good information in forums, it takes an awful lot of effort to get to a place where you could actually trust what people are saying in a forum and find any sort of consensus that you could trust about anything or any other way to verify it. So I'm going to give you an example of a respondent that we had in Germany, a young woman who has a rare disorder, and she's been prescribed steroids for the rest of her life. And she really feels like that's not a good thing for her health. And so she was looking for other alternatives. Her doctors were kind of giving her no option. And she found on this forum, she found people discussing another option in neuromedicine. And people would talk about how that new drug made them feel, the change in their experience. And that's just information that she could never get from an official source, right? She then took the information about that drug. She went to her doctor and said, hey, what about this? And he said no. So she was an academic, so she then went back and went to the academic literature and found some support and brought that back, and then he said yes, right? Most people don't have access to that kind of information or even the ability to understand it. So there's clearly a lot of opportunity here to find better ways to make social information more useful and, I would say, safer, right? So just quickly, here's an example of what a real user session looks like for a health-related query. The point that I wanted to make is if you look at the time that they spent on this, you know, they spent far over an hour. And if you look at the kinds of sites they clicked on, this is my classification. They clicked on unprofessional information, which was my nice way of saying spam sites, advertisements, and then finally they got to some user-driven Q&A, went back to an advertisement, then they got to an official source, another official source, got back to spam, got to an official source, got to some more social source, and finally back to a professional source of information. So as you can see, there were lots of times in here when the person really wasn't getting the best information possible, not just from the perspective of whether the person should actually be talking about medicine anyway, but from the perspective of what the person was trying to do. Were they trying to sell them something, and were they just trying to get them to click on some ads? So there's a lot more of work for us to be doing here, both from helping people figure out how to vet the official information and helping them make better use of social information.
Awesome.
Any questions?
Thanks very much.
Yeah, it's just an example.
Any other questions? Quickly, anyone? All right, then I'll invite Jenn up to get started. But thank you very much to Jacqueline and to Deb. Fantastic. Please let me introduce Jennifer Lynn from the Silverlight team, and she's going to be talking to us about an extremely cool tool called Pivot Viewer specifically. Thank you.
Is that coming up to me? Okay. Hi. It's on. It sounds a little crackly. All right. I would like to introduce you all to the Silverlight.
It's not. You might need to move it up a little bit.
Sure. All right. Hopefully that will work. I wanted to introduce you to the Silverlight Pivot Viewer control. This control is a multifaceted multimedia experience of a data set that provides you an opportunity to look at trends within the data and kind of observe larger forces at work and drill down into specifics and then formulate hypotheses so that you can move from the data to something closer to knowledge. The first example I wanted to show you is one in environmental infographics. And I think it just popped up behind my, there we go. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick tour of Pivot Viewer, the control. So each of these data points for this environmental data is a capture from an array of video cameras in Tanzania. Professor Ilya Slavslavsky of UCSD is doing some research on the impact of climate change on various species in that area. So what we've got here is what we call the filter pane. It kind of gives you different kinds of data about, this is one camera location. Here are all the snapshots that were taken there. You can look at the latitude and longitude of the locations, the species identified and their genus and family, and then the moon phase and the temperature at the time that the snapshot was taken. So when I was working with the researchers who provided this data, we came up with some really interesting trends that really were not coming up in any other way that they were interacting with this data. Probably the coolest is this. You can kind of get a sense from the data the distribution of temperatures in this region. But if you look per species at the temperatures at which they were making appearances in these video cameras, they found that there were very specific distributions that were not just distributed evenly across different temperatures. So basically, for each species, there's some prime temperature that gets them out and socializing in the wider environment. And therefore, when you deviate from these temperatures with climate change, that could, show that these species will have a harder time interacting with one another, reproducing, etc. Also, very interestingly, is when you look per species at the moon phase at which they were appearing. In this instance, there was a very short period within the months that were studied where this species was appearing. Here you kind of get more of a distribution, but definitely a clear preference to one specific end of the moon phase cycle. And just for each species, there's kind of a different pattern. Really, each of these discoveries is leading to papers that are going to show up in Nature. They're things that were not transparent when you look at this in a spreadsheet. And just the richness of being able to kind of get some really granular information about the time and the appearance and the species, but then also look back and say, like, okay, well, what are the larger trends in the data? And kind of take data points and take the granular data points and kind of facilitate the ability to formulate a thesis, which you can then apply to other data sets and kind of see how they apply. So I just find that this is a great kind of introduction to how scientific discovery can be aided by really useful and intuitive tools. Here we go. So here's a little more of an introduction into the tool. Pivot Viewer is a control that's based on Silverlight, which is a web platform, which is then hosted inside a web page or a web script. So basically, when you're developing against a Pivot Viewer application, you're going to have dependencies on the Silverlight platform, and you can kind of interact with it in a broader web experience. So maybe you have a Pivot Viewer, and you also have some table that shows related data. The next kind of tourist look at a scientific area that I wanted to show you is the human genome. Just wanted to give people some background in genetics to kind of couch the conversation. To give you a sense of kind of the scale of what it means to go zooming from a chromosome level to the actual nucleotides, the actual genetic data, you can see for each of these buckets, there's actually a very small section that has to be zoomed quite large until you actually get to the one all the way on the left, which is the actual, genetic material, the actual like nucleotides themselves. And the other problem that we have with this data is that there's a lot of information, but the noise-to-signal ratio is just horrendous. There's so much genetic garbage that's accumulated through the process of evolution. So really, the genes that we've identified are the nuggets of actual information that we can take action upon that live within just enormous data sets. So the approach that I'm going to show you is another Pivot Viewer application. And I wanted to kind of explain the visual language that we're using for this collection. So you'll see that there's a trait card that we have for each of the genes. And it gives you the name, the band, the location within the chromosome, and some just more information about the gene. For example, the high affinity immunoglobulin. And then what you get below is a colorful representation. So each of the colors represents a different amino acid. An amino acid is a trio of nucleotides. So to encode the same data more succinctly, you can translate from nucleotides the AGCTs into amino acids. Gives the same information, but just makes it a little more compact. And then we just use different color representations to kind of make it easy to kind of scan across and look for trends. So I'm going to bring up the Pivot Viewer application for this one. Here we go. So this first collection that we're looking at is a representation of the human chromosomes. Every human has 23. So there's the number of chromosomes, and then this guy is X, and this guy is Y. The length, or the height on the screen is representing the length of the chromosome. And the blocks, the bands that you see, represent the density of gene data that's been identified to have some specific purpose. So I happen to know that chromosome 2 is pretty interesting. So we'll load that one up. And what I like to do when I'm looking at these chromosomes is I like to look at kind of where do they land within. Or these are each gene, so where does the gene land within the chromosome? So interestingly enough, there's kind of a nice distribution, a little bit shorter on the beginning, which makes sense because often the ends of chromosomes have less dense material, or less dense content. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to look over here. Just kind of looking for what are some interesting patterns that we see. And right away, I've come across some of my favorite genes, which are these guys right here. It's kind of funny to have favorite genes. And what's really fascinating about these is, as you zoom in, you see that there's this repeating pattern. And there's these Gs that just kind of go across in a diagonal throughout this whole gene here. And then, interestingly enough, the one next to it also has this repeating pattern. But if you look around at other genes, that kind of structure just isn't showing up. So one thing I happen to have noticed is that these are collagen genes. So to just kind of test this theory that maybe collagen has something to do with striped patterns, I'm going to come do a search for collagen throughout the gene, or throughout the chromosome. And so we get some results. I'll kind of condense them so you can see them together. And you see that definitely there's some sort of theme here around striped patterns. This one's kind of hidden in like the middle. There's something going on there, right? It kind of gives you this hint. You got this little hunch that might be able to develop into a thesis. And my coworker who worked on this data with me, she went to a geneticist and kind of asked, like, how come when I visualize my collagen genes, they have this interesting pattern, this kind of structure to them? And he said, well, of course collagen would have a structure. It's a structural protein. Like, that's what it does. So just kind of interesting to be able to come up with a thesis and validate it, even as kind of a biological tourist. You know, this isn't my area of specialty, but you can kind of get these interesting patterns just from having rich data that's visualized in a way that's accessible to the human mind. Let me just take 1 second and show you. Let me open this guy. If you use kind of a more traditional visualization of this same data, what that looks like in your usual web browser. So this UCSC project is the most commonly used genome browsing experience. And one thing you'll notice is that zooming requires clicking between HTML pages. Every time I click, I totally lose the sense of context, because this whole area here just updates to show the new data. And then eventually, I think at this level, I can just click on here. And I actually get the detailed metadata. So basically, the same metadata that I got just by clicking and zooming in the pivot viewer experience requires many clicks, and just you lose the sense of where you are in the data. You know, you're drilling in, but you don't know, well, where was I in the gene? I don't remember. Was I at the beginning, the middle? I don't know. So just kind of give you a sense of kind of what the standard has been for this kind of experience. I know it's getting to be a little late, so I'm just going to go through the slides pretty quickly. If you want to use the pivot viewer control, we have an API that passes data between the control and the hosting web page. I really don't want to restart.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. No problem. No problem. And kind of the collections or the visualizations that I was showing you. This is kind of the first example is a simple collection. There's no linkage between this and any other data. It's just a discrete data set. And then the second one I showed you, you had the chromosomes that you can zoom into and click on and get to the more rich data set, which had the actual gene data. And I wanted to put up a few links. If you wanted to play around with this on your own, it's publicly available, and we would love to hear feedback from you. This is definitely a fun little bit of Silverlight technology that we've been working on, and we will be working on for the next release. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Any questions? Or?
Jen? Yes, one question.
Just a quick one. Does this necessitate for the long term on Silverlight? Because I know that there's a movement overall in technologies to move away. I mean, I know that's the plugin architecture that Microsoft pushes, but I know that overall across the technology community, there's a movement away for the future in the next 5-10 years to move away from proprietary plugin architectures and more kind
more to HTML5 kind of open
HTML5
standard?
kind of technologies.
Yeah. Right now, we don't see it as a competition yet, because basically this kind of rich visualization isn't enabled in HTML5. Definitely is something that we're keeping in mind. You know, we started this project on WPF, which is an even more constraining platform. So we see these kind of ideas as being platform independent, and certainly I hope that we see it kind of developed across different products. And right now, it's just really easily accessible in Silverlight if you wanted to use it for a project you're working on.
Okay, cool.
All right, thank you.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. And now I'd like to introduce Brett Brewer from Office Labs. Brett's a general manager in Office Labs. I think was recently with Live Labs. So you've transferred from one applied research team, kind of as it were, in Microsoft to another.
Just can't get enough.
Exactly. So for a brief overview about some of the cutting edge technologies and projects that are going on in productivity apps, I'll hand it over to Brett.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually was on the team that originally created the concepts behind Pivot Viewer. So that was a lot of fun, and there's a lot of promise for that project going forward, certainly. Let's see. You can figure out this high-tech stuff. So yes, my name is Brett Brewer. I'm a development manager in Office Labs. Office Labs is a lab directly within the Office development team. So it's a little different than there's sort of variations on a theme with innovation teams within corporate environments. Some are outside the product teams trying to look over them. Some are directly within the projects. Some are directly within the same sort of management structure as a product group, and that happens to be the case with Office Labs. It affords us some really nice features of sort of being right there in with the product team and to be able to have somewhat of a greater influence on the product team's direction going forward. In fact, with Office Labs, we're actually in the same development or same organization as the planning team for Office. So it's nice to be directly in with the teams who are envisioning what are those next steps for the next release, but also, as you'll see, what was that vision for the future of productivity that we see 7-10 years out in the future. So Office Labs in brief, it's about 4 years old now. There's 51 team members. This spans across disciplines from development to program management, design, user research. So it's an interesting mix of disciplines. We have a hedge portfolio of projects. Think of this as just as you would manage your monetary portfolio. You want to have a wide range of projects across the different varying amounts of dimensions, like how long they'll take. Here's a 2-month project. Another one might take more than a year or two. You might have some that are really technology-focused innovations versus something that's more about maybe a design or business focus. And you also might have things that are more validated of an idea, like as soon as you hear the idea, you go, yeah, I get that. Or it might be a little bit more on the crazy scale, and I'll show you how we sort of determine that a little bit later. We also, in the team, have grassroots innovators community support. That's just a long way of saying, how do we help people within Microsoft create any idea that they think is a good idea without having to go through getting management approval and have it be part of their job? How can someone who's in the developer division in Visual Studio create something that's great for Bing? And so you have this sort of cross-pollination of ideas, and just an empowering any person within Microsoft to build whatever they want and give them a forum to be able to expose that idea. And then the envisioning efforts are really about, as part of Office, trying to paint the picture of what 7 to 10 years out might look like for an enterprise worker. So in some ways, that actually starts to overlap, feeling more like an entertainment thing, where the idea is about tell a story. Tell me a story of why the future will look a certain way. And that is influenced by technology trends as well as trends in just how information workers go about doing their business. So the mission is pretty simple. It's to accelerate productivity innovation at Microsoft. Accelerate, we want to be a multiplier to the kind of innovation that already happens, and hopefully fill in the gaps where they need to be filled. It's about productivity. So kind of like all forms of getting things done. It certainly is aimed more directly at the Microsoft Office division, but we don't let that stop us from finding good ideas if they span across different divisions. And of course, we don't limit ourselves in terms of the technology we use. We'll build web services, we'll build mobile applications, we'll build standalone client applications. So here's what we affectionately call the crazy chart. This is probably like the worst infographic you've seen all day. So I'm a developer, forgive me. So this is what we call our crazy chart. And what we're looking at this is, how do we decide what projects we work on? Well, if it's already in progress within the Office division, it's probably not all that smart for us to be working on it too. If it's obvious, like, oh, this is high priority for us and everyone knows it's going to be in the next release or it's currently in development, well, that's probably not all that smart for us to work on either. That would be duplicative work. But the things that are non-obvious, or a phrase that's been thrown around a lot recently is adjacent possible, right? Ideas that are, well, if you combine this idea with that idea, it's something completely new. That starts to get into where a lab is into its sweet spot. How do you take something that's not quite validated and bring it to the area where the product groups believe that, yes, that's actually something we should be investing in. And then you kind of have the long tail of crazy, which is some ideas just sound really stupid when you first hear them. If someone told you about Twitter 5 years ago, you would probably go, gee, I'm not really sure that's all that interesting. But over time, what happens is things start to move from the crazy to the in progress or obvious. You can imagine this is sort of like tectonic plates, right, moving in where these bars get higher. There's more ideas that have been validated that you're moving from the crazy or non-obvious space. And so the job of the lab is really to take the ideas in here in this adjacent possible area, extend them in interesting ways such that they become part of the plan of Office, or do inventions that are somewhat more crazy or harder to believe up front, but with a little bit of validation can actually be shown to be something that's really quite worthwhile. One interesting aspect of the crazy chart is kind of a revisionist history that happens. Things that were crazy 3 years ago, well, even take like Kinect. You might have thought that was crazy 2 years ago, but now it's in progress and already being done, right? And so a little bit of revisionist history is things start out crazy, but once they become obvious or in progress, it's kind of hard to think of them as crazy anymore. And so it's an interesting look at how labs move things through this process. And of course, the box is just a way of showing here's our sweet spot for where the labs work on. I wanted to show, in honor of the crazy chart, a little bit of a crazy idea that if you saw this, you might think, wow, this guy really is nuts. But the underlying vision that's behind it is there is this meme about of gamification in the enterprise. And if I'm trying to teach somebody how to use Office, how might I go about doing that in the way that is most fun and most engaging for that user? Well, if I do it with a game where there are things like a very deterministic set of goals and achievements, and that helps them understand how to do and use their tools better, that could be an excellent way of integrating games within the enterprise. And so this was one of the ones we came up with more than a year ago, where clearly, even today, with the amount of laughter I heard, you might expect that that's in the crazy side of the chart, right? But we're on the second version of this, coming out in a month or so, and it really isn't Angry Birds. It's just probably a copyright violation there, probably. Uh-oh, I didn't say that. But this is one of the, so also as a lab, you want to have centers of excellence, right? You don't want to be a place where, well, I can just send contract engineering to them to do work. You want to have centers of excellence so people come to you and say, gee, we're thinking about some kind of gaming thing. Well, who has the expertise in that? Well, these labs guys have tried these things in multiple ways, have validated or not validated certain things. Can we get to them for their expertise of how to go about doing that? And so Ribbon Hero was about seeing if maybe one of those centers of excellence is about gaming in the enterprise. And so it really is just a game played in Office applications. You use different features of the ribbon to expose how to essentially just use Office better. And it comes with a really nice, interactive, immersive environment for, one of the stages is in ancient Greece, one's in the medieval times, one's in Egypt. And it's just a more engaging way of figuring out how to best utilize the Office suite better than you currently are. We're also seeing, in a less geeky way, how this affects the sort of customer satisfaction with the applications over time. But it gives you an idea of the kind of span of things that we'll work on within the lab. There's two other parts of the lab that I want to quickly touch, and we don't have much time. One is the garage that I talked about, and one is envisioning. I'm going to fly through this because I know we don't have much time. The garage is really for employees who like to build stuff. The garage is not a team. There's no organization around it. In fact, it's just one PM, one program manager on our team who basically is the caretaker for the whole thing. But when you talk about like multipliers for an organization, there's one PM who has been the caretaker for Garage now for a couple of years and has created this groundswell of grassroots innovation within Microsoft where everyone feels empowered to just say, I got a great idea. It's not part of my regular job. How do I go about building it? Well, maybe it requires some expertise I don't have. How do I get connected with people of like mind who have that expertise? I might need some server resources to actually deploy it externally. How do I get that? These are the kind of resources that the garage would supply. And it really is about having that mechanism for employees to experiment on their own. And if you look at the next slide, was sort of a mishmash of different things that came out of the garage. I don't know if probably no developers here, but if you're a developer, you would know Fiddler right away, a very well-known debugging environment for the web. So these are the kind of things that come out of this grassroots innovation that would not otherwise have come through the regular sort of planning and development process in a product group. Office Talk is something that's actually being integrated directly with our IT environment's internal websites. OpenAuth was the first .NET implementation of OAuth. Some really, really interesting work that's being done. Some very small, admittedly, right? But some could grow up to be really important things. And it also is a big differentiator for the general morale of any developer to say, I got a good idea, I can make it happen. Envisioning is a part, sort of a sister team to the lab. It is about the seeing what is that vision or painting a picture of what productivity looks like 7 to 10 years in the future. So if you can think of the garage as like between now and 6 months from now, right? That kind of level of project. The labs are working at the 6 month to 2 years type time frame. Envision looks at the 5, 7, 10 years out. And it's really understanding the trends, both technology and business trends for painting a picture. And how that picture gets painted is mostly through some really fantastic videos they've created that really bring home how we think people will work in the enterprise 7, 10 years in the future. And part of that is also having rooms set up in our executive briefing center that bring some of this stuff to light where you can see the video, but you can also see demos that start to say, these aren't videos that just show some crazy future that we don't think will be realized. We actually can show demos that are the building blocks for how some of these things will come to fruition over time. And so if you want to learn more, officelabs.com is where our sort of external projects are. You can find Ribbon Hero there if you want to beef up on your Office skills. And then the envisioning video there as well. And you can see that for the Office division as a whole, where do we see enterprise productivity going? So with that, do you have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Brett. Any questions for Brett while the next speaker sets up?
So can you implement Ribbon Hero in the Mac version of Office? We feel left out.
We do not have plans to do that, no, sorry.
So unfair.
We're not that crazy.
All right, very good. Well, we're going to get set up here. The one thing I would like to say is and this is Keith Steury from the Xbox, specifically the Kinect team. He's a user research guy, and he's going to be showing us some of the Kinect research that was done. And I think you're going to find that quite cool. But he was also very kind enough to bring a few Xbox games that we can give away. So for everyone that registered, we've cut your name. We've produce little slips for everyone that was registered in the workshop today. And at the conclusion of his talk, we're going to do a drawing, and those 5 games will be yours. So that's a nice lead-in, no? Okay.
Of the day, and I figured if I didn't bring gifts, no one would stick around.
And we will. I know we're running off a little bit, but we're going to be done at 3:15. We'll get you on the bus as quickly as possible.
So a little bit about my team. I'm part of the Games User Research team here at Microsoft. We're a team of about 22 full-time staff and about 17 vendors and contingent staff. And our goal, or our mission as a team, is to connect our target customers as we build games using controlled research psychological methods. The reason we do this is to help teams realize their design vision and to ensure that our games are engaging, approachable, and fun. And we do this, when we do this, we want to make sure that our data is accurate, that we provide it in real time so that it's useful for the team to make use of it, and that it's specific enough so that they can take action on it. So it's not just theoretical data, but it's actually data that they can act on. We work on every game that Microsoft does, but today I'm just going to talk about the work that we did working on Kinect games. Obviously, a lot of work went into Kinect. There was a lot of really cool, smart people working on technology and art and audio and all of that. I'm just going to focus on the user research part. And specifically, I'm going to focus on kind of how that overlapped with Kinect technology as well as game design, and kind of how we bring all 3 of these parts together. And bring it together to create a fun and compelling experience. So user research is really about understanding user behavior, right? So that's kind of what it comes down to. And Kinect is a natural user interface. So this should be easy, right? It's user behavior. We've finally broken through the barrier of the terrible controller that, if you're a gamer, you think it's great. But if you're a non-gamer and we've tested you, you sit in the lab and you go and try and figure out how to use it. Well, we've gotten rid of that. We no longer have this awful controller. We can just tell people to jump. Everyone knows how to jump. They'll jump. Problem solved. We can all go home. Not a lot of work to do. It's easy. Except that, what happens when I tell a person to throw a ball? Well, it seems like everyone's going to throw, right? Unless they throw sidearm. And maybe they throw underhanded. Maybe they do some sort of over-the-head kind of throw. What about people who use 2 hands to throw? What about this guy? The problem is that while the controller, even though it's an unnatural user interface, the problem is that there's user behavior, but then there's the technology that translates that behavior. And that's where we run into the problem and the difficulties. So while this controller is unnatural, it's great for development because there's 14 buttons on it. And as a technology, all we need to do is look for an input from one of those 14 sources, and we know exactly what to do. Our lovely Kinect product, the number of inputs it has is infinite. You can throw a ball here, 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 and then do that in a variety of different ways. So how do we solve this problem? The ideal solution would be, let's adapt the technology to the behavior. Let's just bring it together. The problem is that doesn't exactly work. And the reason it doesn't work is due to classical conditioning. So this is where I get to put on my psychologist hat. So as most of you know, classical conditioning is this idea that you can get an animal to repeat a behavior by reinforcing that behavior. Well, it turns out that that works in humans as well. One of the classic studies in this field was that not only did they reward, say, a pigeon for doing a specific behavior, they just randomly rewarded pigeons. So every once in a while, the door would open and a pigeon would get food. What happened is that the pigeon developed superstitious behavior. The pigeon started to believe that it was doing things to make that door open. So it would jump on one foot, waiting for it to open. It would spin in circles, and the door would open. So what we did when we tried to adapt this technology to fit the person is we did the exact same thing. And the reason that we did it was because we started opening up a variety of things that would trigger the outcome that's wanted. So a great example is an early prototype that we worked on was just catching a ball. So you would line up, the ball's coming towards you, you would catch it. We're not really good at tracking fingers yet, so we needed a way to drop that ball after you caught it. So the idea was, well, let's just have the user put their hand down. That seems easy enough. You drop the ball. But then there's questions, okay, how rigid do we want to be about that? Does it have to be straight like this? What if the hand's over here? What if it's here? We decided, well, let's just kind of open it up. Let's just say a sphere right around here. As long as their hand kind of crosses that plane, that'll work. So that's what we did. And I didn't bring the video because we have a policy of not showing embarrassing videos of our participants. But we brought a participant in, and she caught the ball. And then she went, oh, I need to drop it. Started moving her hand around. It went like that, and the ball dropped. So the rest of the session, this participant would catch the ball, slap her stomach. Catch her ball, slap her stomach. Catch the ball, and slap her stomach. And we saw this in a variety of forms and in a variety of ways. So it became really difficult to figure out how do we kind of deal with this. So the way that we dealt with it is we figured out we need to get on top of it. We need to start understanding users before we get to the technology part. We just need to bring users in and observe what they do. So have them drop a ball by dropping their hands. Understand what that looks like. Understand what behaviors are going to happen before we start development. So then we can develop the technology as best as we can around that user. So we have pretty much a standard usability lab. It's a little bit different than the rest of Microsoft in that it's really big, so that it's like a living room, has a big TV, and people can come in and they can play these active games. And so what we did is we just had people, like I said, come in and we'd say, bowl a ball. And we'd watch them bowl a ball. And we'd see them bowl this way. We'd see them bowl that way. And we recorded it not only for, say, design purposes, but we also recorded it through the Kinect technology. So that when a developer then decided that they wanted to make a bowling game, they already knew how users were going to bowl and could design the game around it. Again, this is part of us trying to get timely information to developers. So this information is available now before they start coding, rather than building a bowling game, bringing people in, seeing where all the problems are, and then building around that. So we talked about Kinect and technology and that overlap. I'm going to talk about user behavior and the game design overlap. I'm going to give you an example from Kinect Adventures. This is the title that shipped with the Kinect sensor. And this was a mechanic, it was jumping. So this one's easy. Users know how to do it. There's not a lot of variation, or at least variation that we can easily code for. So this really wasn't much of a problem. The problem arises is that now the user has to coordinate this in conjunction to what's happening on the game screen. So one of those things was just an obstacle course, where you just need to jump over this bar as it approaches. And what you can see happening here, and this happened across nearly all participants, is people are jumping too early. So we're doing something wrong here. I mean, obviously, in real life, you can do this quite well. There's spatial cues that you pick up on that tell you when to jump. But we're just not doing it for some reason in this game. So we tried alternative ways of doing it. We tried swinging arms. We tried putting indicators in the game to tell you when to jump. And it just didn't seem to work at all. People are still too early. I'm going to jump ahead. Oh. Oh, yes. So the solution for this was what we weren't able to do with the Kinect technology. That was to change the game design to match the user behavior. So what we did, and this is pretty subtle, is that we changed the game. So the person there is ducking, and then she jumps. Actually, her timing there was fine, but I think it's this next one that was fine. And the next one, she jumps too early, but she still had success. Why is that? Well, the reason is that when a person jumps, we speed up the cart that they're on. So when they jump too early, what ends up happening is where they would have come down on the obstacle, we've now passed that obstacle under them. So we didn't worry about fixing the problem of people jumping too early. We just adapted the system to it. And the really cool thing is that this actually turned into a gameplay mechanic. So in this game, you're rewarded for finishing earlier. You get more rewards, but obviously if you're jumping through the whole thing, you're going to perform worse, or it's going to be more difficult to perform the tasks that you need to do while you're going through the system. So it added this gameplay trade-off that actually ended up working out quite well. So we've got all three of those pieces, and now the job is to bring them all together. So where we're at now at this point in development is we know the sensor's working for the most part. During launch, it was quite a trek with the technology constantly changing and sometimes getting better and sometimes getting worse. But we'll say the technology is working. We know how people are interacting with the game. Now we just need to bring all of these together and create a fun and compelling experience. So to do that, we don't need to watch them anymore. We know how they're behaving with the game. That's a known quantity. All we care about now is getting as many people as we can to try out the game and give us their feedback on it. So to do this, we have other facilities called play pods. It gets cut off there at the bottom. These are just rooms that are kind of, I don't know, maybe 8 by 10. People can come in. There's a TV, Kinect sensor, and there's a computer where they answer questions. And we just have them play the game, and then we ask them a bunch of questions about their experience and get their feedback. So we might ask them things like about the Kinect technology. How accurate was it? How responsive was it? We might ask about their behavior. How difficult was it to do that move? Was it too easy? Was it too hard? And ask them about game design. What did you like about the game? What did you dislike about the game? What can we change? How was the pace? Was it too fast, too slow? How was the length of the game? Too long, too short? All of those types of questions. And we repeat this process over and over and over again until we've created a fun and compelling experience. So that is my 10-minute talk on how we worked on Kinect. And a little data. We did 4 launch titles within Microsoft Game Studios for the Kinect. They were Kinectimals Adventures, Joyride, and Sports. We ran 113 studies total on those 4 titles. And that resulted in using about 3,250 participants. We did all of this within about a 15-month period of time. So thank you to everyone who actually worked on this. And also just a quick plug, if you're in the Seattle area and you want to sign up to be a participant and come in, you can go to Microsoft.com/playtest and sign up there. If you have kids that like to play games, we're looking for lots of kids and broader audience. Obviously, we're not making just Halo anymore, so we're looking to really expand the kind of people that we test. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith. I have a question for the audience. How many people want Keith's job? A question over here, I believe.
I have a question in terms of how you went about, or how mindful you were with the distribution capacities that people had
Yeah, we actually have a group. So the question was how much we thought about really about accessibility issues and people who have different physical abilities. We have a group within Microsoft that is focused on that. We did the best that we could. We tried to identify ways that, hey, we don't need to use the lower body for this. We did some things on a couple of games where it's kind of no-fail gameplay. So if you couldn't, say, jump, you wouldn't fail. You just might not score as well. But it was one of those things that in the rush to launch, it was really hard to prioritize that. But that is an initiative that we are looking at within Microsoft Game Studios.
Right, one more question. Or who wants to do the drawing? Should we do the drawing?
I have a question. So, how does doing game usability research, how do you classify that as being different from doing traditional usability research?
Yeah. So the short answer is that in traditional usability research, faster, quicker, shorter is better. So the most usable game in the world is a big button that you press and it says, you win. That's not a compelling experience. So that is where the attitudinal stuff becomes really important. Traditional usability research is used to remove blockers to enjoying the game. But then it becomes an issue of how do we test for attitudes, how do we test for gameplay strategies, and really thinking about what is the optimal path for the player, what's going to be the most fun experience, and testing to that as opposed to testing to easy is better.
All right. Let's do some drawing. I'm going to fold the box, and I'm going to ask you to shuffle around and then pull out a name. This will be for
Forza 3.
Who is it?
Oh, you're going to make me say names. John Pecco?
Whoa, that's me.
All right.
All right, next. Fable 3.
Whoop. Ernie Hood.
Ernie here.
Ernie.
Must be present to win.
Ronald Larson.
I saw him here. Yeah, there you are. Okay, get it to Ron. This is for Flight Simulator 10.
I knew this was going to happen. Lee.
Jackson Lee.
Jackson Lee.
And psychological action thriller.
Alan Wake.
Alan Wake.
Andre Brock.
Do
we have one more?
Best for last. Halo Reach.
Brian Landry.
Brian here. Brian. Oh. Excellent.
Mohammed Jahari.
Yes. All right. All right, everyone. This here concludes the meeting. Thank you so much for coming out, for your patience and flexibility, and have a fantastic conference.